It's more NBA draft stuff, and this time we're talking about the potential number 1 overall pick, Alex Sarr, along with a bunch of other guys. Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and yes, it was me. I voted Domantas Sabonis All-Defense, Defensive Player of the Year, MVP, whatever other award, Coach of the Year, GM. It was me. I did it. I did all of it. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That is linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free and we are available on all platforms. So double bang, hit the thumb, leave your comments, all that stuff. We're talking NBA draft. As I said, we're talking Alex Sarr. We're talking Stephon Castle. We're talking Yves Missi. We are talking Kel'El Ware, Superman. Bunch of stuff for us to get into in the show, so we'll do it right now. All right, he's back again for another year. Brian Schroeder is here with me to talk about the NBA draft. Brian, welcome back.
Thank you for having me again.
Well, here's a question. Again, I'm asking a variety of this question to other people, but I'm going to frame it a little bit different to you. This draft class is considered weaker than others. As someone who looks at the NBA draft year round, is it harder to get motivated to do the research, do the work when you look at it and go, I'm not really sure how this is going to go. There's no real standout guys. Is that harder for you as someone who looks at it all year?
I think it's harder on the aggregate for most people. I, of course, am a weirdo, though. I my favorite guys in a lot of drafts are the, like 25 through 50 guys, all the weird guys. So this year's got plenty of those. I think it's definitely, like, star-wise, it's a weak draft. It's one of the weakest in a long time. I don't know if it's weaker than 2013. It's kind of hard to tell that. But I do think the two areas it has strength in are sort of athletic big men, like it could be useful pieces. And then, like, there's a lot of, like, junior upperclassmen, like 6'6", 6'7" guys who have, like, some talent, like Jalen Tyson types. Like, there's a good amount of those guys. There will be 20 solid NBA players in this draft, 25. And I think it's not as bad as 2000. It's probably not as bad as 2013, although it almost certainly won't have a Giannis in it. I don't know. It was harder to pay a lot of attention to college for some stretches this year, I'll say that, because this is a bad freshman class. That's the biggest reason. I mean, the international guys are fine. The G League guys, I think they're both, and Tyler Smith, they're all, like, decent enough prospects. It just was not. I don't think we're going to have even 15 freshmen drafted in this class, which would be the lowest in just like 2011. Like, it's rough.
Yeah, that is true, because you see so many of these guys, they're 21, they're 22, they're 23 in some cases, and a lot of the younger college guys coming through have got some significant weaknesses, which is why we have this whole problem overall with this class. But what we are going to do, though, is we're going to get straight into talking about someone who's not part of the college system, someone who is, I guess in majority of places, you're going to be seeing Alex Sarr mocked as the number 1 player, going as the number 1 pick to the Atlanta Hawks. He played for Overtime Elite last season, played down here for Perth this season. Sarr is 19. He's 7 foot-ish. Those numbers that people can see on the screen, they're per 40 pace adjusted. So we're talking about, he only played 18 minutes a night for Perth, but 3.4 blocks per 40, 21 points, 10 rebounds, 22 usage. The shooting is not 100% there, but I think that the 3-point attempt rate for him is an encouraging sign, and I do think he will be able to shoot it. But my number 1 question for you here on Sarr, Brian, well, I've got 2 actually main questions. Number 1 is, do you think that he is clearly above the other players as a number 1 guy? Do you have him as that guy?
Yeah, and I have since September, October. The story of this class for me has been kind of waiting for someone else to challenge him, because he's not a Wembanyama. He's not a Luka Doncic. He's not a Zion. He's not one of these guys who's even like a Cade Cunningham, who was an obvious number one pick and was way ahead of everybody. Like, he never really separated himself in the way those guys did. But I just felt that his size, his movement ability, his base-up ability, which I think is there. That's why I kind of hesitate on the idea that he's somehow like a weak offensive player. Like, he can handle a little bit. He's a better isolation shooter scorer than a guy like Evan Mobley was, which I think Evan Mobley's still been usable offensively. It's more the fit is kind of odd there. But yeah, I've been waiting. I thought for a while Topic might hit him. I thought Risa Shane might hit him. I just don't see the guys who have like this like number one option star upside to really make it worth my while to pass up on a guy that I have in the same general tier as Mobley, Jaren Jackson, Chet, Nick Claxton, like all those guys. Like, I probably will be a top 5 defensive player of the year finisher at some point. Like, just an obvious, literally 2 through 5 coverage, big, who can switch up and down, pursue shots, doesn't foul, and is an obvious. Like, I don't really think the NBL used him. He played some with Bryce Cotton, but he's going to look so much better if he plays with like a Tyus Jones type. Like, any point guard who likes to throw lobs, Sarr is just going to do some of the stuff that Lively does for the Mavs, where he just is too tall, too fast, and dunks everything.
Yeah, I think he's clearly at number one in this class as well. I've had him there basically, or similar to you, like as soon as I started doing this stuff as a brief overview back in whenever September, I had him as number one. I said, like, oh, well, who's going to take it? And no one has. And every time I look into it, he's still there as that number one player. I guess the question is, Atlanta's got pick one. Let's assume that they don't trade it. Like, does he have to play center? Could he? Because they've got obviously Capella and Okongwu. They've had a Jalen Johnson breakout. So could he play next to Okongwu as a 4? Could he play next to Johnson as a 5? What position is he at his best? Because you mentioned a bunch of names like Chet Holmgren, which is interesting because when I put all of his numbers in to try to set a statistical shape of what he does, Chet was the name that came out. Right, so it's Chet, and there's Jaren who plays the 4 and the 5, and there's Mobley who's playing the 4, who's better at the 5. So which way do you see that going?
I think he is closer to the Jaren and Mobley sort of end of that spectrum. But he did weigh in at, 226 at the combine. And I think he could easily put on 10, 15 pounds. And if he's 235, 240, 7 foot, he didn't get, like, that's one of the more encouraging things about him in the NBL was he had some foul trouble in some games, but it wasn't, I mean, the NBL, if nothing else, is a man's league. Like, it's been said a lot. It's one of the reasons why it's become a pretty good marker for NBA success is, like, just a lot of large men in the NBL. Aaron Banks is in there. He's hitting people.
Yeah, literally hitting them in the tunnels outside the locker rooms.
Yeah. And Sarr never really looked physically overmatched in a way that I think a lot of thinner, younger, switchy centers might have. So I think he could play the 5. I think you would ideally, that's kind of why he fits with the Hawks. You could start him with Jalen Johnson, and then he could play with, like, Okongwu can hang in at the 5. You can play Bruno Fernando your 8 minutes a game or whatever you're playing him.
Yeah.
Because Capella, I think, will probably be traded regardless. I just think it's time for him there. They need to retool. He could go – there's so many teams. He could be a fallback for the Pelicans, the Grizzlies. Any team that doesn't get their center in the draft, but Capella is fine. He'll give you 25 minutes a game and he'll be solid. I think Sarr can handle the 5. It really just depends on – the only issue I would have would be playing the 5 in a Trae Young defense is a lot different than playing the 5 for, I don't know, the Grizzlies, let's say, because there's a lot of coverage. And even DeJounte, if he stays there, has not lived up to his defensive reputation for a long time now.
That's right. He got votes for defensive all defense team today, so someone was paying a ton of attention to the Hawks this season, very obviously. What about Sarr?
He has been bad.
Yeah, he's terrible this season. There's no debating that. But when he's getting votes and Sabonis is getting votes and Bobby Portis is in there on the second team, then there are some people not paying a huge amount of attention, I would guess, to some of that stuff. But that's okay. We're here to pay a little bit of attention to Alex Sarr. The shooting is the thing that we want to pay attention to. 27% 3-point attempt rate down for Perth, which is pretty good for a guy who's he was 18 most of the season. That is encouraging to see if that does develop. Like, we know that Jaren Jackson's volume increase through 3-pointers is probably an outlier skill development, but if we compare him, let's compare him to an Onyeka Okongwu who started taking some threes this season. Like Sarr is probably going to push more into the Jaren volume side than the maybe we occasionally take the threes.
Yeah, I think it's a real part of his game. And there's nothing about the way he shoots that tells me he shouldn't be able to. He's got a nice little turnaround, 15, 16 feet. He's been able to work that into like his mid-post stuff. He has pretty good touch, I would say, overall. Free throw shooting is solid. I don't see why he can't be a decent three-point shooter.
Yeah,
it's not something I would. I think you would let him shoot in the NBA for now, and he's got to prove he can make them. But I don't really see it being an issue. He should be in the 30s most of his career.
One last thing on the shooting is the two big men. One you've already mentioned, another one who was in a recent draft who did dabble with some three-point shooting in college. One of them is Evan Mobley, and that's never really come so far in the NBA. And the other one who's a guy that started to do it in college, didn't do it as a rookie, but started to do it a little bit this season, was Walker Kessler. Now, we don't think of Walker Kessler as a three-point shooter, but he did start to show some things. So, yeah, those are, I guess, the downside of this. Like, maybe he shoots and he's got some shots up and the free throws are okay. That could be like the downside of that he just then ends up putting that shot away completely. Is that like, I don't feel there's much of a risk of it going in that direction, but how do you see those sort of comparisons?
It's not even, you mentioned his three-point rate. It's not even that. It's more that he doesn't hesitate on them. He takes them. And that's really, for me, that's the biggest marker. Do you take threes when they're available? Yeah. Yes. And I think you'll be fine.
And so we know that 3-point percentage and shooting samples take a long time to be able to stabilize. You're talking 500-600 attempts usually. So the confidence thing is one of those key things. Like, does your coach allow you to do it? And B, do you want to take it? Are you scared of doing it? And that's like, we have the confidence of him being able to do it. That's going to be one of the key things that we watch as we move forward with Alex Sarr, who again we both agree is probably or should be that number one overall pick. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, maybe you are someone who owns a professional NBA team who has the number one draft pick and you're looking for someone to have a job maybe influencing the front office. You don't have to necessarily go to someone who may have lived in your house as one of your children. You can go to LinkedIn Jobs and find someone who is actually qualified for the job. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. It is a network of professionals. There's 1 billion people on LinkedIn, and you can get your job as a small business owner in front of the right people. In fact, LinkedIn small business owners or hiring managers tell us that they find a qualified candidate within 24 hours, 86% of the time. That's a pretty big success rate, and getting those jobs out there to the right people can help your business really take off. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That is linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, so we've got Alex Sarr. We're going to do some more big men soon. We'll get to those guys, but I want to talk about another player who is going to go pretty early here in this draft, I would guess, and that is Stephon Castle out of Connecticut. A player who, I don't know, there's certain things that happen pre-draft that gets my sort of like ear popped up and go, oh, that's maybe not the right thing to say. And Castle's insistence of like, I am only a point guard and I only want to go and play for teams that need a point guard makes me want to ask you this question. He's 6'6", he's almost 20 years of age, a bit older as a freshman, low usage rate player. The shooting is obviously not there, really good defender, but is he kidding himself? Like, does this, not only can he be a point guard, maybe he can develop into it, but this, I have to only go to a team that wants a point guard, is like, where do you sit on that? Like his assessment of where his game is, or just even that attitude in general.
So what's interesting about Castle is that in high school, he was a 36, 37 usage guy. Like he wasn't very efficient. He was a Cam Thomas type almost in high school where he was shooting. Now he was a little more efficient. He was a good inside the paint scorer. He drew, I mean, I'm sure you can imagine in high school, he drew an absurd amount of fouls, but he was maybe more almost like a James Harden. He sort of like he was driving to the paint. He was kicking out. I don't think he's a full-time point guard. I think the passing is there. I think he's honestly more just trying to kind of position himself as like more than just a defensive wing type. And which I think could be in his game. He's got to shoot. The shooting was just never consistent at UConn. It was never consistent in high school. he was a little bit more of an off the dribble guy, I guess, but I think he's sort of now he was a relatively inefficient, high usage high school scorer on a not very good high school team. Does that mean he's an NBA point guard? Probably not. But I think he's sort of banking on that being. I would guess he's sort of banking on a hype of, in between, whatever the middle is of those two extremes of being, I think he was like 38 usage in high school, and then being, what is he at? He's low 20s, but for most people, he was 17, 18.
Yeah. He
was not a high usage guy. But I think the positive for that is that his coach didn't need him to be, the ball handling player, the lead, and he settled into that role and played magnificently. So I really don't think it's going to be a huge issue. I think he and his agent are probably just blowing smoke to let teams know, like, it's not like he's not going to play if he gets drafted by Charlotte or something. You know what I mean? Like he will play. He might have to be their point guard now. But
the thing with someone like, okay, so we've seen this probably there's probably other prospects that are in this boat as well, but the low usage player coming out of college doesn't usually translate into a primary initiator. Now, one of the guys who wasn't particularly high usage coming out of college was Tyrese Halliburton. He obviously had other outlier skills in terms of IQ, decision-making, passing, assist numbers really high, but very low usage, low free throw attempt rate. The other one on the real extreme bottom end of that is Dalen Terry, who had like a 15% usage rate, and he's been like, have you ever seen him play on an NBA court? Like, it just never happens. Like, he's bad. Like, he hasn't done anything good. And that's where you have the worries of, like, if you're in a college environment, like 22 usage is fine, but like you said, it was much lower earlier on. And that most of the time we're looking at guys' usage rates and going, they're going to have to pull back coming into the NBA. But with him, we go, if you're going to be a point guard, that probably needs to go up. And that's just not an easy thing to do for a lot of players. So, I don't even know how best to like describe what Castle is going to be more like in the NBA. Because the Halliburton stuff is just, that's not going to happen. I just use that as a low usage guy.
I've made the Josh Hart comparison. I think that's what he should be looking to be. But I also think there is a middle path here. Like I said, he could kind of be like Derek White in San Antonio was a high usage player, and he has his moments of high usage. But I think he's going to be a guy who gets 6 shots one game, 17 the next, depending on where he goes. I really feel like he's really scalable and moldable to whatever his team needs him to be, though, which is why I was a little, we'll say, confounded by what he was talking about the other day. But I really think that's just him blowing smoke and just trying to get people to take him more seriously as like a guard. Because to me, he's a big guard. He's a guy who does guard things, but is wing sized, which is very valuable. Like, unless you are just the drizzling shits defensively, like Spencer Dinwiddie, it's hard to not be valuable. And even that, Spencer Dinwiddie was a perfectly valuable player for the better part of a decade. It's hard to be like, that's a very valuable archetype to me. I love his defensive, just his activity level, his intelligence. He's as good at fighting over screens as any college player I've seen in the last 6-7 years. He doesn't get screened. I mean, he's 230, I would bet. Big, huge guy. So that's really the upside. Like, if he goes at 6, which I think is the earliest he could go, and he's able to actually develop a floater game a little better, be a little more efficient, hit some more pull-ups, he could be like a second. I think it could easily be a secondary option with great defense. I don't know if I would bet on that, but yeah.
Two names. You mentioned Derek White, which is an interesting one. Obviously, White is a good shooter, and I'm not sure what his shooting numbers weren't this bad at Colorado, but they never developed in the NBA like to be this elite shooter that he is at the moment until like the last year or two. The other one is D'Anthony Melton as well, who's a bit smaller. Who's like a point guard-ish player who can do it for parts and bits and pieces, but otherwise he's a defensive guy who can shoot, but you're not always super confident in it. But again, like his shooting numbers, I believe at USC, even on low volume, I think were higher than what Castle's were. But those players are extremely valuable, even like from a fantasy perspective, they're unbelievably valuable as well. But even in real life, having that guy is super, super key. But I guess with so many players, Brian, like when we talk about the draft, it's what situation do you go to? What are you expected to do if you are picked in the top, let's say 4, and people go, well, you are our number 1 guy, this is the guard, and you're running things, well, people are going to be let down. But if like he slides and he goes to 8, or he goes to a team trades up to 4 and gets him to play a secondary role, then he's going to become one of those like perennially underrated players who is awesome and contributes to winning. And perspective on a lot of that stuff is so key in terms of how we evaluate these guys, because he's got all those things that if he went at pick 15 in a lot of drafts, you go, man, I love this. This is awesome. He's going to be so great. He plays 28 minutes. He starts. He comes off the bench.
Wallace. Casey Wallace is a comparison too.
Exactly. And Casey Wallace, we've seen what he's done this season. But if, again, I talked about this with someone, I think earlier today, about the draft value and the salary slots, and if he goes at 3, like that's not 3 in another draft, but you're going to be paying him like he's a pick 3, and the prestige around a pick 3 or a pick 4 or a pick 5 or whatever. Puts the perspective. This is the real
issue. Like I had this point on Twitter the other day. This draft, like getting number 1 in this draft is so important, because I would hate to be 2, 3, 4, 5, because you're just not getting. I've heard you say before, I've heard other people say before, that a lot of these guys are 13, 14, 15 picks. I wouldn't go that far. I think a lot of these guys are 6, 7, 8 picks in the average draft. But there's not even a Brandon Miller. Like, and I was low on Brandon Miller. He'd be number 2. I would consider him at 1, but he would be 2 by a huge amount.
I agree. Yeah. No one would really challenge him for 2, I don't think.
The only guy who would have been close, if Topic hadn't got hurt and had been able to produce more, I think he might be the guy you look at, but he got hurt. And it's kind of hard to see what he is at the higher levels. Still a big fan of his. I have him second, but it's not that close. And Castle. So to me, when I'm at 6, 7, 8, 9 in this draft, I wouldn't be looking for like who are my building blocks, who are being my max players. I'd be looking for like, that's why I mentioned Josh Hart. When I'm good, who do I want on my playoff roster? Like who am I playing 25 minutes a game in the playoffs? And the Castle is maybe the number 1 guy on that, this entire top 20 for me in that. Like, I want him on the floor in clutch situations, because he's just going to make the right decision. He's a monster defensively. I mean, there's a chance he could be. I'm not going to compare him to Caruso, but that could be his role. Like, Caruso's not really a point guard, but he is terror. He terrorizes people. It doesn't really matter what his position is, if that makes sense. Like,
he just does defensive stuff, and that's important to have that guy. Now, we're not going to talk about this player in this show, but what we are going to do soon is talk about some other big men, but we can reference this in with the other big men we're going to talk later, with the fact that Steph Castle's teammate is Donovan Clingan. Who would you take first out of those 2?
I guess it depends on my team, but I have Castle much higher, but they're both in the same tier, if that makes sense. Like, they're both in my second tier, which would probably be the 3rd tier in an average draft. That's kind of what I'm getting at. Like, and then Thompson's, even like the Keegan. Well, Keegan I was a little lower on, but like the Jabari Smith, like the guys who could be all-stars if things bounce the right way, are not in this draft. Aside from like Saloon and like Cody Williams, the guys who are just betting on tools. But like Risa Shea, Holland, Buzelis, all those guys to me are good, but they're guys that are, same for Clingan, I think that they max out as like starters.
Yep, and that's sometimes that happens, but it's
fine.
It's about
that's
that,
fine,
that mental block of like, what have I invested in this guy? This is not what usually happens, but when that's what you're picking from, that's what you're picking from. Can't do much more about it. Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It is the formula for winning championships. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance with superchargers or roof racks or exhaust kits, LED headlights, whatever it is you're into, whether it's speed or power or style, eBay Motors has you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number 1 ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Now, I haven't heard from eBay Motors. I'm not sure whether they have those like car sweaters that you put on a car outside just so nobody sees what's under there, but they probably have that as well, just in case you want to keep it sort of cloaked from your neighborhood. There's everything. There's 122 million parts. Surely they have car raincoats out there. Maybe not. Maybe they do. I don't know. But with eBay Motors, you know that the part you get is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to US customers. Suck on that, everybody else. All right, let's talk big men. Which way are we going to go first? We're going to go to Superman himself, Kel'El Ware, in Indiana, transferred across from Oregon. Was he at Oregon last year?
Oregon?
Yep.
Yes.
Transferred across from Oregon. And a guy that, when you look at the numbers on him, I think that they're relatively interesting. He is, I don't even know how to fully describe him. He's a guy that had some struggles, obviously, especially as a freshman. He's 7'4", 12 rebounds per 40, 2.3 blocks. Not gigantically high usage, but that's okay for a big man. 23 usage, doesn't take a huge amount of threes, but gets to the line. He just seems to be almost that, I don't know if perfect role play is the wrong way to say it, but I think that is his upside, to be a guy that could step in and just do bits and pieces without ever having superstar center upside or even like high-end and all defense sort of a guy. I was more excited about him before he went to Oregon coming out of high school. So this is something interesting, but it hasn't really worked out. What is his role? Is there offensive upside? Is it more going to be a defense-only player? Is he a guy that's got, judging by his numbers, he doesn't, but is there any sort of passing ability here with that to expand that part of his game out?
I would say so. I would say he can do basic DHOs and stuff. The interesting context for where, I guess there's two pieces of interesting context. At Oregon, he just didn't try. He coasted on his talent. And he got benched. They stopped playing him. They didn't like him. And when he went to IU, the entire pitch was like, we're going to give you good NIL money. You're going to be our star. But if you don't try and practice and give effort, we're not playing you.
Yep.
And I can say this as someone who watched, I would wager I watched more Indiana than any draft person because it's my alma mater. And I was excited for them to have an actual talented player. I would say his effort was, it was 90% as good as someone like Lively. Like he didn't really take plays off. I would say his rotations are still sometimes. That's why he's not like an elite shot blocker. But also Indiana just played with a huge clogged paint. That's the important thing. That was the worst 3-point shooting team in recent college basketball history. They had nothing. He was the only guy who could hit. And they had really terrible guard play. Like he couldn't. Guy would seal down the court and just wouldn't get entry passes. So he sort of had to start creating on his own a lot. And the results were pretty interesting. He started working in like this deep, like 12-foot hook he would get. He had all these turnarounds against Michigan State where he would put the ball on the floor, almost like Jermaine O'Neal style, like dribble into a spot, like one shoulder, other shoulder, turn around, hit like a 12, 15-footer. I think the handle is decent enough. He wasn't really allowed to grab and go, but he had some semi-transition. Like he's huge. That's the thing. He's got physical tools.
Oh yeah.
I would say he probably had the best combine of anybody. Like just his measurables, his speed, all of his agility drills. His vert was really good. He just was really impressive physically. He moves to the point that I've had this comp for a while, and it's going to be a strange one that I'm now talking about how good I think he could be. I think he could be like a third Miles Turner kind of center, if that makes sense.
It's onto a comps, right? So I found this website yesterday that does a bunch of either physical comps or advanced comps and per 40 comps.
Per 40, yeah, I know it's 20.
You know the one? All right, so if I did the per 40 one and then I did the advanced stat comps, the two top names in both of those were both top 2 overall picks. Can you guess who they were?
Would have been 8.
One of them was DeAndre Ayton. Yeah, the advanced comp was DeAndre Ayton. And the other one was someone who hasn't been as successful as Ayton, but definitely is much more maligned than DeAndre Ayton as a top 2 overall pick.
It wasn't Bagley, was it?
It was Marvin Bagley. It was Marvin Bagley.
I think I did see that. Yeah, Bagley. There is a little bit of the Bagley. He's larger. But Bagley, if nothing else, is a very fluid post scorer. Like he just moves really quickly, has really good feet. And I think Kel'El has some of that. But it's just the size. He's way bigger. Like he's much bigger. He's 7'1", legit, 240, 7'4" wingspan, runs like a deer. He is really physically just impressive. He's at a level that even Lively, he was a better prospect than Lively in high school, I think.
I agree.
Pretty easily.
Yep.
And Lively, to his credit, really improved at Duke. Like that's where all this came from, and he really stepped up and became. But where, like, you kind of forget how big he is. He was the only guy, aside from one another. They played Purdue and they played UConn, and they lost both those games. Well, they lost both games at Purdue, but they lost the UConn game by 25. They lost the Purdue game by 20 because they couldn't shoot. But Zach Edey was, I think in the first game, was like 6 for 14. And it shot a bunch of free throws. And Klingon was like 3 for 12. Like they tried to post him up a bunch. And like Lively, he did pretty well. Like just getting a huge guy backing him down, he didn't really wilt and fall away, which is for me, he does big man things. Like Ware's a decent screen setter. I think he moves really well. He's going to slip screens. He's going to catch, shoot little floaters. But the guy physically that he kind of reminds me of, and maybe it's because he kind of looks like him, is almost Willie Cauley-Stein. Yeah. Difference is you're getting him much younger. You're getting a Willie Cauley-Stein who hasn't had time to learn bad habits like he did when he was 22 and a half when he got drafted on the other side, if I remember correctly. He was old.
I don't remember him being that old, but yeah, okay.
He was in his 20s. He was at least 21. And he had just terrible habits. He just had nothing. But if nothing else, Cauley-Stein, the reason he went as high as he did is he was an incredible mover.
Yeah.
At that size. Like just moved in a ways that there's guys like Mobley who get like the hip flexing, and the next guy we'll talk about is really good at flipping his hips. And that with Ware, it's more just like this guy runs like a 6'6" guy. He runs and moves and jumps like a guy, in a way that Ron Holland does, where it's like that's not a normal athlete, but he's 240, he's huge. I think there are still issues. Like he's not, I would say his general IQ, however you want to call it, is he can be beaten. He can beat. One small thing that Ware did that was very annoying to me, whenever he matched up against these big centers, these important centers, and then the backup came in, he just stopped guarding them.
Okay. And
the guy would just back cut in. He didn't take it seriously. I still don't think his mentality is where you'd want it to be, but I think this year was a year where he learned how to be a center, if that makes sense. He did center things. And I'm of the opinion if he gets out of the top 15, he's going to be an enormous steal. As a guy who could probably start pretty quickly and just does things physically in the same way Lively was a steal. Same way Jalen Duren was a steal.
I think part of when I talked about those comps was not because, it's very easy to bash what Marvin Bagley was and where he was picked, and DeAndre Ayton's lack of effort has been bad, but those are guys that were picked top 2. The best comps with him are those high level players. And that's that's eye opening, because you don't pick him top 2, you don't pick him top 10, you might not pick him in the top 20, to be honest. And I'll say some mocks with him in the second round. And that sort of
I would consider him top 10 personally, but yeah.
He's probably not going to go, though. I would say there's almost no doubt he's going. He's not going to go in the top 10. But that sort of talent comparison is it's an interesting upside sort of a bet in this situation. But it does, as I said, you bring us into the next guy, another big man we're going to talk about here, and we are going to go to Baylor, and we are going to look at Yves Missi, who is, I guess, a slightly different sort of a big than what Ware is. You'll see guys look at the numbers that come up on the screen: 7 foot, 20 years of age, 2.7 blocks per 40, lower usage player, doesn't take threes, got to the line a ton. 61 effective field goal percentage, 62 from the line. He just feels more traditional as a big man, but as you alluded to before, the movement ability and the rim protection stuff. Who do you think is the best rim protector overall in this class?
Sorry. Well, Klingon, I guess, but I'm thinking more when I think of a rim protector, I guess rim protector and paint protector are two different things. Klingon is a paint protector. You go at him downhill, you're not going to score. He will block a shot. Whereas a Sarr and these other guys are more recovery guys, can cover gaps, can rotate. So I would say if you're looking for a straightforward, a drop big, Klingon. But I would say Sarr otherwise. But Missi and Ware are not that far behind. And I really think Missi in particular is just so athletic. I had guessed before the combine he was going to jump 37, 38 inches. He was 38.5, which for a 6'11", 235 guy is crazy. That's pretty great.
Yeah, it is. And that level of movement for someone, again, the size of these guys, and they're legit 7 foot, and producing that level of athleticism, and it helps with, like you said, movement, recovery, weak side, rim protection as well. So you don't just have to be, Walker Kessler, Donovan Clingan, drop back and stand under the basket. You can get out, then come back over the top. I mean, that's a different wrinkle for teams. It doesn't mean that they can necessarily always play the 4, but it just means that you can do different things, and if you get dragged out, you can come back and still make those sort of a play. So there's a level of, it's not as intimidating. It's not as you are, you're the size of Donovan Clingan standing in there, but it's, I guess, a little bit more bit more subtle in terms of the intimidation because you sort of don't know where they're coming from. In terms of offense for Missi, is there what is there? We obviously say he didn't take any threes at all. Is there anything outside of pick and roll finishing, outside of dunks? Is there any ability to move on from that, or is it literally just you can't? He's a decent.
Like, I don't know if his handle's good, but he's very fast. He had like a secondary position, give him the ball, let him kind of square up on another slow-footed big and just blow past them. That's where a lot of his foul drawing came from, where he would just face up, take 2 dribbles into the paint, and attack the rim. And college centers they just had to foul him. He's too fast. So I think there's a little bit of like, again, I'm not comparing him to Bam at all offensively, but I remember Bam in his first year didn't have the handle or anything, but he did just sort of give him the ball at the foul line. He's going to drive, just go to the rim. I think he has a little bit of that. Really, I don't know if he needs anything more than that because he might be like a Tyson Chandler level like lob guy. He's just such a great athlete. The actual physically, the guy he really reminds me of, and I'd have to get the exact measurements, is rookie Nene, like young Nene, before he really filled out. Because Missi, unlike a lot of these switch guys, even Ware, who was listed at 230, Ware is kind of thin looking. Sarr is thin. A lot of the guys I mentioned, Jaren, Chet, these guys are thin. They're not big hulking like behemoth centers. Missi's different because he's not even fully filled out, but he's in the shoulders. He's huge. He's really big. And I was really thinking the other day of like, who else do I remember who was like a good athlete, fast, but was also just like thick. And like Turner's kind of one of those guys, but Nene is the guy I really think of because young Nene would put hammers on people. He had no other skills, but if you got him out, and Missi is that kind of guy. If he gets 2 feet in the paint, 2 hands on the ball, he's dunking.
I'll go back to that player comp.
Or he's getting fouled.
The player comp site has the best physical, not speed, but the physical similarity is Thiago Splitter, and we know he was really slow, but he was huge, like he was big shouldered guy. But interesting, you brought up the name Bam Adebayo because he was the number 1 stat comparison for Missi from that 1 year in Kentucky for Bam for both advanced stuff and per 40. Bam was the number 1 comparison. Now, obviously, Bam's game has taken big leaps forward and he's done a bunch of stuff that he didn't do at Kentucky. But that is really interesting to see these sort of guys. When we talk about this draft being a little bit weaker, there is these players who can still have roles. And you mentioned that Ware could be a starter and Missi might be able to move into that sort of position as well. But you just have to be understanding, I guess, of the limitations that they have and not be expecting, well, why can't you do what Joel Embiid does or whatever it is? Like, understand, well, you've got this very specific role and skill set, and we pair you with another center and you play 20 minutes a game and that pushes up, and you just do the little things that are useful to help. And I think that is really one of those things, again, getting your head around in a draft like this is going to be key to do. We're going to move into a guard now. We're going to talk Ajay Mitchell, a bit of a change of pace from talking big men, because Ajay Mitchell is not a big man. Ajay Mitchell is a guard coming out of UC Santa Barbara. A guy that you were very... I asked everyone to come on, hey, who do you want to talk about? And you go, I want to talk about Ajay Mitchell. Ajay Mitchell's one of the guys I'm here for. 6'4" guard, 22 years of age, almost 26 points per 40 minutes, 5 rebounds and 5 assists. Big usage player. Didn't take a ton of threes, 22% three-point attempt rate. What's the thing about him? What's the weirdo trait with Ajay Mitchell that makes you go, yeah, like this is my guy?
He is one of the best drivers, like rim touch generators I have scouted since I've been doing this, and I can back that up. I think it's him, Devon Dotson, and Grant Riller were the 3 guys who had above 65% at the rim and below 6% of their makes were assisted. So he just goes to the rim. He has what I like to call the layup gene. Some guys just have it. Some guys have that ability to time out when they're going for finishes, power through people, all this stuff. He has it, but then. And I knew that about him coming into this year, and that's kind of where I started watching him. And it was like, I wonder if that guy can shoot. He could be interesting. But I watched him in a few games, and he's a quality defender. He's a big guy, 6'6" wingspan, moves well. He was really good. He showed at the combine scrimmage. Really just a smart passer, really good timing. And so more and more this year, I've been like, this guy's not. For a while, I thought he was like a bench scoring, like a Colin Sexton type, like combo guard. And now it's like, this guy might be like a point guard. Like he might be. The guy I've been thinking of for a while, another 6'4", big-shouldered guy who just gets through it, Kobe White. of like a guy who can really could maybe initiate offense for real. The question I think has always been his athletic ability, because he's not a dunks guy. He's an under rim finisher. He's an excellent under rim finisher, but that always is a concern. Played really low level. He was really efficient, and you have to dominate who you play. That's a big thing for me. That's why I was always low on the Cam Reddish types and like Justin Edwards this year, although he played better. But like, if you're not dominating in some way in college, it's really hard for me to accept you. It's why this 2 steal rate thing is always such a. I still think the only all-star drafted from the NCAA in the last 15 years who had a below a 2 steal rate was Drummond. And Drummond had a weird freshman year. Like every all-star they get steals because it's just show you can physically dominate at that level. They steal, they dunk, they get fouled. That's like the 3 things that I think future NBA stars actually do in college. Now, I'm not saying Ajay Mitchell is a future NBA star, but he to me just feels like a guy who will be in the league for a long time. He do some of the stuff that Rozier does if the shot comes along. And I think it started to this year. He started taking more off the dribble. There are some guys who can't shoot, and there's some guys who don't have to shoot. And I think like an Amen Thompson, like a Mason Jones before he was like a draft year, which is a weird comp, but he's a shooter now. But like there are guys who just never had to shoot because they could just get to the rim at all times. John Morant never had to shoot until he was in the NBA. And like
there's a couple of
that
things.
kind of guy is always interesting to me.
There's a couple of things that I want to get to with Mitchell here. Is that you brought up some interesting names and you talk about players dominating. And I've said this all the time. That's like if you're coming into the draft and people are like, well, I'm going to take you in the top 8 and you're 23 years of age. I go, yeah, you're 23. Of course you need to dominate. Like if you're not dominating, then we've got to have a real discussion against kids. Like it's like third year summer league. Like you better be doing something awesome. Otherwise I'm going to have some real questions about what's going on here. And
think about you, Henry Ellenson.
Exactly. And you're 22 years of age and you're playing for Santa Barbara. Like you should dominate and you do. But that's great. You've done those things. The other thing you talked about is getting to the rim. Now, the guy that's been the best rim pressure, rim finisher, rim attacking guy in the NBA for like 4 years or whatever it's been is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, a guy that didn't do a huge amount in college. We know the Kentucky situation where you were big on Shai coming out of college. So let's just say that Shai is 100 in terms of driving, finishing, putting that pressure on. I'm not telling you to say that AJ is going to be Shai or anything like that, but like in the level of persistence and aggression that Shai shows in being able to do that, like is that like, I'll keep using this term through draft seasons, is the shape. Is that the sort of shape of the game? Like doesn't have to take the 3 so he doesn't and just keeps putting that pressure on.
I would say, so if Shai is 100 on that scale, let's say Brunson is 95, I would say AJ is like an 88, 87. And like Kobe White's probably this year would have been an 85. Before this year would have been in the 70s because he just didn't do it. Let's say like a guy like Sexton is probably like a 75. Like he can do it a little. That's an interesting. It's why if I thought AJ was like a surefire start, he'd be my top 10. He's the guy though, and he's gonna be the guy when you get around 22 to 25. I'm gonna start thinking like this guy needs to get drafted. Like he is more polished. It's almost, I would say, very different play style. Very different size, but it was where I was not even a huge Pajemski guy last year, but once we got into like 15, 16, 17, I was like, this guy needs to get drafted.
Yeah.
Like, he's going to be better than these other players are. AJ does things that will get him on the floor if he gets a shot.
Yeah,
that's what you need to do as a rookie.
It's always useful, isn't it? Like, what can you do a little bit of, can you get the steals? Can you? And that is, again, I love that you brought that up about the steals, because that's something. It doesn't mean that the player is going to be a high steals guy coming into the NBA either. That's not what that means. But it's a great indicator of a player who is going to usually have some level of success. If they do steals in college, it doesn't mean that it comes through, but it is one of those things. Those names that comes through. So Donovan Mitchell was like that, coming in as well, like with huge steal rate, and like he doesn't really do that now. Zion Williamson, out of control steal rate, some of the biggest steal rate you've ever seen. Brandon Clark, like as a big man, like it was
a good example. TJ McConnell, 4.3 career steal rate in college.
Yeah, and like it doesn't mean that like TJ still gets the steals now, but Brandon Clark never does, and Zion really doesn't ever do it. But it's a good indicator of like you can actually hang at these levels. So that's always looking for those sort of indicators or markers is always an interesting thing.
The dunks one I always look at is that CJ McCollum had, I think, 17 as a senior, 17 dunks in like 30 games.
Okay,
which CJ McCollum may not have 17 dunks in the NBA since, but he at Lehigh he was getting at the college game he was getting into the paint just dunking on everybody.
Yeah,
like There are guys in this draft who have less than that. That's a lot of dunks. So like, yeah, that's a good one for me. Of like, these guys are just physically. Now AJ is not a dunks guy, so that kind of is a point against him. But he's a steals guy. He's a huge free throw rate guy. I mean, what is he at? What was he at? It was crazy.
47% free throw rate. I got him.
47.
Yeah. On
a guy who drives.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, that's a lot. I don't know. 22, 4 and 4 per 36. Like, he just filled it up. He did everything really well. 31 usage, good efficiency, good foul shooter. He's a lefty. That's part of it. But I don't know. I've watched him. Probably watched, I would say, 8 to 10 games of his. But I've never seen a game where he played that. He played poorly on a bad team, might I say, like not a good Santa Barbara team. And he just seems like he can scale right up to NBA usage and just be a bench guy pretty quickly and just be in the league. And I think when you get in the 20s in this class, that's what I'm looking for.
We've got one more guy that we're going to look at here, and we're talking weirdos, talking Marquette, we're talking Oso Ighodaro. Is that how
Ighodaro.
Didn't think I was getting that wrong, but I just wanted to be. I don't think I've ever said it out loud. Oso Ighodaro from Marquette. He is 6'11". Measurements are all going to be like either shoes or socks, or whatever. When I looked at Tankathon, it listed him at 6'11". He is he's 22. He averaged almost 9 rebounds per 40, almost 4 assists, over 3.5 there, over a steal, over a block per 40 minutes, 20 usage. Doesn't take threes, but it's really just about the size and the defensive stuff and the athleticism with Ighodaro.
It's also about he is a hub offensively. He's a passer. He has a lot of just really great bounce passes and kickouts. He can throw that little spin pass at the top of the key right to a cutter. Like, he wasn't the main hub for them because they had Tyler Kolek, who's one of the most polished point guards in the country. But Oso could really run out of the high post, just find guys, move the ball really well. He's one of my favorite kind of role players. I always say use Carl Landry an example of this. He doesn't play anything like Carl Landry. Carl Landry had 2 skills. He could box people out and he could shoot 16-footers. He just happened to be one of the 10 to 15 best basketball players in the world at both of those skills. So he's in the NBA. And also it's like that. Like, he's not a well-rounded big. He is a dunk. He's a finisher. He passes and he sometimes blocks shots. That's all he does. But he's very, very good at those 3 things. Like, he's really good feet, really good contain. I almost compare him. He's almost like the intersection between Larry Nance Jr.
That's interesting.
And Trace Jackson Davis, of like kind of smaller center who can really be a weapon finishing at going to the rim and can really kind of punch above his weight class defensively, if that makes sense. Like, he gave playing in problems. He hits people hard. He's 225, but he's just really good shape. He put on a lot of muscle at Marquette. He was a really thin, wiry, like not very impressive guy. I remember as a freshman, but they have a really good strength and conditioning program. They really develop guys. Marquette doesn't get transfers and nobody transfers out. They get guys in as freshmen and they stay there for 4 years and they become good players. And also I just enjoy watching him. I think he was 3rd or 4th in the country in dunks. He had a high assist rate for a center and he blocks a lot of shots. That's all he does, but he's great at it.
That was going to be my next question. So is he strictly a center?
I think so. I mean, defensively, I think he can cover out on the perimeter a little bit, but you're just not playing a guy who literally didn't take threes. I don't think he took a single one.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. He had like a heave. So he took 1.
Yeah. So there's a 0.1% 3-point attempt rate. So that's, obviously not moving the needle there. Like, you talk about the development of Marquette guys. We saw it with Olivier Maxence Prosper last season. Not that he did a huge amount this year, but he sort of stepped up and grew and got stronger and worked there on the perimeter. And we've seen that with Ighodaro this season as well. Is there any level of starter equity down the line here? Like, because you mentioned 2 names, Larry Nance and Trace Jackson Davis. Like, they are definite starter caliber players.
I think so. I mean, I think he would just be a guy who fits in as a piece guy and kind of he needs the right system. I actually kind of like the Heat fit for him because I think he does a lot of the same things as Bam, like the 2-dribble handoff stuff, like the cutters. Because for the longest time, the Heat have been trying to get like a big, huge guy to play behind Bam, and they just don't. They don't. Their offense when he's off his defense is, he's Bam, he's great, but their offense when Bam's not on the floor, especially if Butler's out or like Kyle Lowry was out, they had nothing. Like, if they had, which is crazy because Thomas Bryant in the those are guys who are offensive first players, but they can't dribble, they can't handle, so they couldn't run any of their sets. And that's who I would draft if I was the Heat. That's a guy I would go after.
I feel like
this guy can play 15 minutes a game.
I feel like in the past, most teams, especially with the centers, it's like, well, we've got our starter. Our backup needs to do something different. But especially like with Dallas, it's like, okay, Daniel Gafford's out there, and then he goes out, and then Derek Lively comes in and is just going to be Daniel Gafford, and they're just going to be fresh Daniel Gafford, and then Lively goes out,
better,
and then Gafford, he is better, yes, and then Lively goes out, and then fresh Derek Lively comes in. So they're just the same player. So you don't actually have to change what you're doing at all, and you can mix and match as much as you want. But that's never been a thing that teams have done really in the past. So like, and it sometimes can be hard to find that Bam Adebayo center who is out there, distribute the ball, but he's not stepping out and taking shots. That's not an easy thing to do. The number one stat similarity that came up for him was Xavier Tillman, who again has that passing ability. He's not super big, but defensively he can hold up, and he's not going to shoot, and he shot horribly this season, obviously. But just that archetype of a big man who can do some distribution, and that's not everybody. And I think more teams should probably look into doing that, in getting someone that just makes sense with the rest of your guys, and your scheme doesn't. And if he gets injured, he steps in and he does it at 75%. But you don't have to change things around.
It's something the NFL does that I wish NBA teams would do more, where they just get a guy who can fill in. This guy plays a specific role. And they also, one thing the NFL does that I wish more teams would do is double up at positions of need. And I know it's harder with less picks, but I always find it funny when a team takes a guy in let's say the Wizards take a Kispert. Kispert's an excellent shooter. People would just be like, oh, well, their shooting needs are fixed. No, they're not. It's one guy. Take another shooter. I think the Spurs should take two guards. Unless they trade for Garland or Trey or somebody, I think the Spurs should take two guards, because they have one NBA caliber guard on their roster right now, and that's Trey Jones. And I like Trey Jones a lot.
He's
not a guy who should be playing. Not yet. I think he showed signs, but it's still.
He did improve. Yeah,
but and Blake might be best as like an attacking, like almost like a 2-3, like what we thought James Bouknight was going to be at guard, than like a creator. But like I still think, even with Blake Wesley, you need four. You don't need three guards. Four guards is what you would want. And I really wish that NBA teams would do more of that. And I feel like Oso is the first thing. Oso is a classic. Like, this guy fits a specific role. For me, especially if I'm drafting, he's probably going to be a second round pick. Like, I could see him going in the late, like maybe the Knicks like him, especially when they have 2 first round picks. But for a guy who's going to be more than likely picked between 30 and 50, I'm personally, especially if it's a center or a point guard, if it's a guy who's I'm projecting it's a backup, I just need him to be an adult. Like, don't make mistakes. Don't make my team worse. Come out here and just the Monty Morris thing, like help. Like, just don't, because even in these playoffs, so many teams, the Nuggets in particular, when the starters are out, they just crater. Like, there's nothing. And like, I just need a guy who's going to trace. That's kind of where I'm getting the Trace thing from. Like, that's why he was valuable for the Warriors this year, is when he went on the floor, they didn't collapse. Like the center position was okay. They could hold their own. And also, I'm very confident will be that kind of player. We'll probably be in the NBA for half a dozen years, maybe longer. Like, just be a solid player.
And that's, sometimes all you can ask for. And Brian, that is all I can ask from you, because that is the end of our show here. We covered off those 6 guys, a bunch of big men, some guards, and it was a pretty interesting insight into those people. Plug your Patreon, get people over there. It's a great Patreon that I've been subscribed to for a long time.
Right. Patreon.com/BrianJMBA. I am still currently filling out the rest of my Capsule Big Board. I'm in the 30s now. It will be free sometime in June, definitely by the week of the draft, but maybe a little earlier. It depends on when I feel like it's ready. I'm trying not to. I'm also waiting for the withdrawal date, which is in 8 days from reporting, before I really start. The worst thing they do, and this is why I had a lot of burnout last year, was I would write these, like, I put 200-300 words, a lot of stats, all this stuff into a guy like Filipowski, and then he went back. And I was like, great, thanks.
Oh, yeah. I
wasted my time. So I'm kind of waiting on some of the guys that might be underclassmen are going back or might not be. But people seem to like it. I enjoy doing the Capsule Big Board. I'll be doing some more mocks here as things go. I've been trying to not do one every 5 days, because it's just kind of pointless. I may start putting in some intel, I've heard, though, because I have some people I've been picking up intel about certain guys, where they might go, who's getting promises, etc. So I think that's to be fun for people to look at. And then over the summer, I'm going to have some interesting projects. I'm working on deciding between 2 projects right now, and I'll probably start one of those up in July. It's just like a fun thing to do on the side. So, yeah.
So go check out Brian's Patreon. Get over there and check out all the info and reward the work that he does put in on those big boards and the capsules and the mock drafts and all the stuff that he does. Brian, thank you again for coming on for about the 5th or 6th year in a row and discussing some NBA draft prospects with me.
Anytime.
And that will bring us, as I said, to the end of the show. So go ahead and throw the old double bang on the episode. Hit the thumb, audio, video, all of those ways to help support the show. You know how it goes. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.